Film is one of the most respected and technically advanced mediums of art that has ever existed. Music and sound exist in every culture and connect people throughout time periods and ages. Together, these two achieve something magnificent and incredible. Film and audio have produced some of the greatest achievements of the 20th and 21st century, not only emotionally, but technically. From silent films to talkies to full-blown musicals, the technical development of film and audio have gone hand in hand with each other as the years have went on. Filmmakers began to experiment with the type of audio that they would have in their films. In this video, I will describe one of those experiments frequently done in films with audio and its effect on the audience. This experiment that I will describe is audio sources. When sound is heard in a film, it either comes from a location seen on screen or it doesn't. If the audio is part of the film's story world, it's diegetic. If the audio is part of the cinematic apparatus that represents the film's story world, it's non-diegetic. I chose to do this topic because as film evolved from silent to non-silent, audio has become an integral part of the medium. Even the recent silent film The Artist is not completely devoid of sound in the form of music. Some films choose to balance diegetic and non-diegetic sounds, while others tip the scales in favor of one or the other. I hope to bring to light all the different ways a film can sound different based on the type of audio it has. First, it is important to recap what diegetic film audio is. To put it simply, diegetic film audio is sound from a source that is either on screen or implied to be in the scene. Take, for example, a scene with two characters talking as dramatic music swells in the background. The two characters are seen to be on screen, performing an action in the scene. The dramatic music is not. Therefore, the character audio is diegetic, but the dramatic music is not. There are many other ways to get diegetic film audio on screen. A popular one is the on-screen band, for example the Cantina Band in Star Wars: A New Hope. They are seen on-screen playing, and therefore they are diegetic. Non-diegetic film audio is a little different. Taking the same scene, the two characters talking as dramatic music swells, the music swelling would be the non-diegetic film audio. Non-diegetic film audio would be defined as audio that is not present in the current action or on screen, but rather is used to support said action. For another example, take a scary movie such as It. When Pennywise the clown pops out of the corner and there's a loud sound effect, the loud sound effect is non-diegetic. Pennywise didn't make that sound as he ran around the corner. It's audio outside of the film's narrative used to support what's currently happening inside the narrative. Music is one of the most common types of non-diegetic film audio. It's less likely for music to naturally have a recurring source on screen, such as a band or radio, which is why it's common for music to be non-diegetic. However, this leads to a problem when expanding upon common film genres. In your typical film drama, the radio is diegetic and the composition is non-diegetic. But what about a musical? Take for example The Bandwagon, a 1953 film musical about the production of a Broadway show. There are many scenes in which the characters rehearse and perform. This is diegetic as the action is taking place on screen in a realistic context. However, there are other scenes in the film in which the characters sing on screen, but the music accompanying them is non-diegetic. This has been referred to by Rick Altman, author of the American film musical, as supra-diegetic. Another example of this is the film La La Land. In the opening scene, the characters start out sitting in their cars, listening to their diegetic radios. Suddenly, a non-diegetic orchestra plays contrasting the diegetic singing that the characters begin doing. This makes the opening scene of La La Land supra-diegetic, according to Altman. However, this definition does not seem to be widely used, and therefore leaves us still with the binary system of diegetic and non-diegetic. This binary system of film audio is not perfect. Without Altman's definition, it doesn't accurately describe what happens when diegetic and non-diegetic sounds are both present in reference to each other. It also does not describe what happens when a scene with diegetic audio sources changes, but the audio is still heard. What about a non-diegetic audio source such as a voiceover that suddenly appears on screen? Was it diegetic the whole time? However, this video is not about the problems with this system, so I will leave it at that for now. Instead, let's move on to the films that get this system right. A good film is able to mix both diegetic and non-diegetic film audio masterfully. One of the best films that I think this year has done so is Christopher Nolan's Dunkirk. The typical blockbuster war film has a sonic foundation of intense pounding music in order to provide a sense of urgency. What Dunkirk does differently, instead of putting all the pressure on its non-diegetic film score, is letting its diegetic sound effects do some heavy lifting. Every explosion, gunshot, and engine has a purpose and contributes to the world it builds. There's no meaningless action scene with just random shooting sounds layered over it haphazardly. There's detail in this film's sound design, and when combined with Hans Zimmer's powerful score, makes it one of the best sounding films ever. However, not all films choose to combine the two types of film audio. Some films prefer to lean more either one way or the other. A purely non-diegetic film could be easily described as a silent film with musical accompaniment. However, a purely diegetic film is rarer to come by. What types of films could be made with just natural audio? Well, it turns out I'm not the only person to ask that. Created by director Lars von Trier, Dogma 95 is a set of rules to film by, one of which is to have purely diegetic audio. Because of all the other interesting rules, there are only 21 films that follow Dogma 95. However, there are other films not in Dogma 95 with purely diegetic audio. One of these is Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds, which lacks a musical score in order to create a tense atmosphere for the film. From here, the question arises, how has audience interpretation and enjoyment changed since the era of the silent film? Which type of film is enjoyed the most? There are many different ways to answer this question, but in order to answer it fully, it is necessary to gather the most amount of data possible. First, it is important to gather the highest grossing films of 2017, in order from highest to lowest. At the time of making this video, they are Beauty and the Beast, The Fate of the Furious, Star Wars: The Last Jedi, Despicable Me 3, Spider-Man: Homecoming, Wolf Warrior 2, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, Thor: Ragnarok, Wonder Woman, Pirates of the Caribbean: Dead Men Tell No Tales, and It. Now, let's gather the most rated movies of 2017 according to the number of votes on IMDb. At the time of making this video, from highest to lowest, they are Logan, Wonder Woman, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, Dunkirk, Spider-Man: Homecoming, Star Wars: The Last Jedi, Baby Driver, Get Out, John Wick Chapter 2, It, and Beauty and the Beast. It's time to examine some conclusions from these lists. First off, what do the lists say? They are representative of which movies got the most money and the most attention, so combined, we can hopefully make the assumption that these are the lists of the movies that were the most popular. This can be taken at face value by the fact that so many of the movies on both lists are the same. Now that we know what these lists represent, let's use them to answer a few questions about film audio in today's world. These films are all combinations of diegetic and non-diegetic audio. This is important because it shows what the average moviegoer is interested in. Art pieces like The Artist, a mostly silent film, are great Oscar contenders, but are rarely ever blockbuster hits. In fact, most big-name franchises these days rarely seem to take risks in terms of sound design. While this isn't necessarily a bad thing, it shows a strange dissonance in the world of film where a popular movie is a movie with lots of sound and music, and anything that breaks that norm is considered an art film or a boundary-breaking film. Whereas when film was just starting out, it was quite the opposite. Asking that question then, are there some films whose enjoyment is purely based on audio? Actually, yes. In fact, while all of the movies on these lists are great in their own right, many of them were marketed or could have been marketed purely on the idea of the audio involved in its creation. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 and its mixtapes, Beauty and the Beast remaking its old songs and releasing new ones, and Baby Driver is an action musical. While many people might not have gone specifically for these things, they were still used to great effect and helped these films climb to the top of the lists. Since we asked that question, it's important to go to the other end of the spectrum. Are there any films whose enjoyment depends purely on the lack of audio? We sort of scratched the surface on this topic earlier with purely non-diegetic/diegetic films and Dogma 95. But those films don't use the lack of audio as their main appeal in the same way that musicals use the presence of audio as their main appeal. In fact, the only film I can think of recently that has used the lack of audio as a trait rather than a hindrance is The Artist. And again, as mentioned before, that wasn't as big a hit as your average blockbuster. This is an important note to make. because the average film has learned to rely too much on audio. From forgetting the show don't tell rule, to just blatantly blaring music throughout its entire runtime, to just using it to scare you instead of actual scare tactics, many modern films have forgotten how to be subtle. The foundation that silent films laid for storytelling was essential for filmmaking. Now, don't get me wrong, as I mentioned before, sound is integral to the medium of film, and they have grown hand in hand together. But it is important to make sure that the visual aspect of filmmaking isn't underrepresented. To end, I would just like to say that nothing is perfect. Audio isn't perfect, the audio system of diegetic and non-diegetic sound isn't perfect, film itself isn't perfect. The state of modern film has led audiences into believing that there is an abnormal and normal type of film audio, but working against that mindset would be ideal in order to expand the variety of movies we see in our day-to-day lives. Just because something is different doesn't mean that it's bad. In fact, in the world of film, everything should strive to be different.